This building behind me is home to a tiny studio of only 16 people, and 500,000 gamers want them gone, like it's public enemy number one. I'm talking about Sweet Baby Inc., one of many consulting firms that help big game studios make their stories more inclusive, like giving Spider-Man a deaf girlfriend or adding a black character into Viking lore. The thing is, those modern adjustments don't always fly well with players who straight up boycott those games. And to really make sure they don't accidentally play one, there is a Steam curator list that tracks every single Sweet Baby game with 500,000 followers. Now, when that many gamers turn on you, naturally, it gets ugly. Hateful comments, angry tweets, and even death threats. And the games? Dead on arrival. We're talking millions down the drain, studios going dark, and quiet cancellations. And the publishers? They pretend it never happened. And here's the part that doesn't add up. If so many Sweet Baby games spark backlash, why are they still in business? Why do publishers keep paying them millions for something that gamers obviously reject? Well, maybe it's because these games were never meant to please you, but to protect publishers from something more dangerous than bad reviews. A system that forces publishers to chase two masters. Investors who want one thing and gamers who want the opposite. And the result? Games stuck in a tug of war. Now, if you want to understand why 500,000 gamers are hunting this tiny studio, let me show you the system behind it. One that everybody talks about, but only a few actually understand. And it all started with a quiet little UN report from 2004. In 2001, something happened that would eventually decide which video games get made and which get cancelled. But it had nothing to do with gaming. It had to do with Enron, a $75 billion energy firm. Everyone had money in it, mostly pensions. But behind the scenes, Enron was, just like everyone else on Wall Street, hiding billions in debt and lying about profits. When the truth came out, it collapsed in the biggest bankruptcy America had ever seen. $74 billion in value gone, including the pensions of 20,000 employees.
What would you say to the folks that used to work for your company? I'm going for it right now.
But that was just the start. The dominoes fell and one company after the other was caught in the act. Fake earnings, stolen cash, hidden debts. This wasn't just bad PR, you know? This was systemic. And people started asking the right questions. What are these companies actually doing with our money? So in 2004, the UN had an idea, a weird one. What if we gave companies a good person score? Not just profits, but 3 simple questions. Do you pollute? Do you exploit workers? Are you corrupt? They called it ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance. Not a save the world mission, but an avoid the next Enron mission. Risk Management 101. But for years, that was just a PDF that no one read until 2008. The banks burned again, this time taking entire countries with them. Public trust collapsed. Banks weren't just in trouble, they were the greedy villains. And that's when BlackRock, think of them as the final boss of money, saw an opportunity. Nobody trusts banks anymore, but what if we become the ethical bank, one that says we care and prints money? Suddenly, that forgotten PDF was now BlackRock's new brand. If you wanted BlackRock's money, and everyone needs BlackRock's money, you needed a high ESG score. And just like that, 3 letters nobody cared about became the most powerful force in business, including video games. But how does this bring us to a tiny consulting firm here in Montreal? Well, here's where it gets interesting. This new ESG religion wasn't just for banks. In 2020, it spread across every industry like wildfire, from HR to retail to film and the military. Everybody was suddenly chasing the same invisible god, the ESG score. Square Enix even went so far and created their own ethics department. Their first decision, restrict Tifa's lovely D-cups, because apparently D-cups look unnatural in action scenes. And that was just the beginning. When COVID hit, ESG found its perfect storm. George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, one after another like dominoes perfectly timed. And gaming companies watched this tsunami coming and panicked. Xbox rolled out their product inclusion framework. Nintendo started appointing diverse board members. Activision, Sony, Ubisoft, everyone suddenly showing ESG slides to investors like kids showing report cards to parents. But here's the problem. Nobody actually knew what the hell ESG meant. You see, companies were not allowed to define what the E or the S truly meant. That power belonged to international rating agencies who mixed everything together and called it a healthy smoothie. Save the whales? That's worth points. Hire more women? Also points. Reduce carbon? Points. It made no sense. Publishers were drowning in rules they didn't understand, terrified of losing their ESG score and BlackRock's money. So, they did what every panicking executive does. They hired consultants, an army of them. Sensitivity readers, diversity officers, narrative consultants, people whose entire job was to bulletproof games from Twitter mobs and protect that precious ESG score. Which is exactly what brings us to a tiny consulting firm here in Montreal.
So welcome to the stage, Kim Belinda.
Hello, I'm Kim Belinda. In my circles, I'm largely considered, I think, a relatively nice person. These are my dogs, Sage and Flaky. These are my cats, Tag and the Gray Boy. I really enjoy Lego. I collect skulls and taxidermy, and I also really like playing a lot of video games, including Elden Ring. By day, I am the crazed CEO of Sweet Baby Inc., the DEI-obsessed censorship mafia who is currently ruining and wokeifying all of the video games that you've ever played.
That's Kim after getting death threats for years. But let's rewind a little bit to 2019, when she was just a young little writer with a chip on her shoulder. Growing up, all she wanted was to write stories about people like her, people that weren't white. But during high school, she was told that her stories weren't the right stories, that only white male stories were counted as literature. So for years, she adapted.
And I did that for years, and I spent like actual years just writing about white men.
Eventually, she broke out and built Sweet Baby Inc., promising to help studios tell more diverse stories. On paper, a noble mission. But here's where noble turned tactical. Her strategy of going about it wasn't to inspire change, but to force it.
Go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want.
Terrify them with exactly what publishers were afraid of the most: losing their ESG scores, with headlines that could tank their entire stock price. So they paid up, and Sweet Baby landed big-name clients with big blockbuster games, not to tell better stories, but to bulletproof their launch from stock-tanking headlines. But bulletproofing launches wasn't enough for Sweet Baby. They wanted to reprogram the entire gaming audience.
We cater them the way that we cater to like a picky baby. We feed them the same thing that we know that they love, and we keep on feeding it. We're like, here you go, you love it, eat this, eat this, eat this. They react as a picky baby would, which is be like, whoa, no, thank you. That what we're doing is creating an entire nation of picky babies, just in case these picky babies don't want to play our games. You're never going to innovate. You're never going to change things. You're just going to keep feeding the picky baby. And we cannot continue to try to create art under a system that is going to bar innovation for fear of a picky baby throwing a tantrum.
That was the pivot. Gamers weren't gamers anymore, they were obstacles. And Kim's job was to re-educate them, even if it meant rewriting the rules of reality.
I once worked on a project where they had an all-white cast, and they expressed their desire, like, okay, we need to mix it up a bit. How about this character's kind of like stereotypically French? And I was like, can we at least make them a person of color? And they said, oh no, that would be weird. They're already French.
That was the crusade, making French people not white. To gamers, this wasn't consulting anymore, it was ideological enforcement.
And Sweet Baby's employees only confirmed it, openly calling to burn the games industry to the ground or to shoot down white male lead game ideas. Kim might not have endorsed those tweets, but by then it didn't matter. The mask had slipped, because now the question wasn't what publishers were making, it was who they were protecting themselves from. Certainly not angry gamers, but angry shareholders.
But here's the thing about serving two masters. Eventually, you lose both. And gamers, they were about to show the world what 500,000 customers could do.
The response was instant and brutal. Every game Sweet Baby touched became a battlefield, starting with Alan Wake 2. A new black female lead was introduced, and gamers lost their minds blaming Sweet Baby. Remedy's creative director, however, denied it outright, saying she was always meant to be black. But it didn't matter. Despite having sold over 2 million copies, Alan Wake was no longer Alan Wake, but Alan Woke.
Another white asshole deciding what I get to do, how I get to do it.
And then came Spider-Man 2. Miles dating a deaf girlfriend, a pride flag. And while the game itself was solid, the story felt like it had other priorities. Representation, representation, representation. And once again, Sweet Baby was in the crosshairs. Maybe not for the pride flag, that was Insomniac's doing, but for everything else. But nothing compared to the Suicide Squad disaster. Years of development, hundreds of millions in budget, but only remembered for one thing, Mrs. Freeze. She was gender swapped. She wore a kindergarten pride outfit, and almost overnight, Mrs. Freeze became the rainbow ice queen of inclusion.
Here's the thing. I'm all for pride. Nobody's questioning that. But this has got to be one of the most kindergartner art experiment outfits I've ever seen.
Sweet Baby didn't even design the character, but again, it didn't matter. They were guilty by association. But here's where things got murkier, because even when Sweet Baby was not involved, the same pattern emerged over and over and over again.
So, I'm non-binary. What does that mean?
It means I don't feel like a man or a woman.
Dragon Age, Concord, Forspoken, Square Enix $100 million disaster that sold so badly, their president had to apologize to investors for its sales have been rather lackluster. It was always the same pattern. Checkbox diversity, preachy dialogue, dead game. But despite the pattern, publishers kept doubling down. Why?
The way games are funded, you don't use your own money. Even EA, games are hugely expensive to make. They're upwards of $250, sometimes $600 million. It's for certain live games. It's incredibly how expensive they are. And to do that, your CFO is your best friend.
Yeah, and when a game costs more than a Hollywood blockbuster, you stop caring about what gamers want and you start caring about what investors want, namely ESG scores. So gamers did what they always do. They get organized.
In February 2024, the infamous Sweet Baby Inc. detected list launches on Steam. A simple list, not to harass, but to inform, like an ingredient label on food. And then Elon found it. The world's richest man calling Sweet Baby straight up an evil blight on the gaming industry. 5 words that turned the gaming controversy into global news. And Kim, well, she leaned into it.
By day, I am the crazed CEO of Sweet Baby Inc., the DEI-obsessed censorship mafia who is currently ruining and wokeifying all of the video games that you've ever played.
Well, she wasn't laughing. To her, this was not criticism, it was a full-blown, coordinated harassment campaign. Death threats, bomb threats, her employees driven offline, and everyone kept saying the same thing. Sweet Baby is killing games.
They will claim that you are rich, that you are backed by, shadowy cabals, government orgs. They claim you have the ability to force their favorite studios to bend to your whim, rather than the truth, which is that studios and teams hire us to make stories better.
Shadowy cabals, government orgs. Her co-founder David Badar found it almost amusing. Detractors would rather believe there's a shadowy cabal forcing them to put this stuff in games. They'd rather believe a make-believe fairy tale than accept the truth.
A shadowy cabal controlling the industry? Not quite. But 500,000 gamers tracking Sweet Baby? They were sniffing around the right tree. They just blamed the wrong branch.
Meet Weird Ghosts, a Canadian fund that only invests in the right kind of game studios, the kind where 50% of founders check a diversity box. The nonprofit arm, Baby Ghosts, hands out $25,000 grants. Not for good games, not for innovation, but for demographics. One of their star recipients? Of course, Sweet Baby Inc. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't some venture capitalist's pet project. It's your money. Tax dollars funding video game consultants.
No conspiracy whatsoever, just a simple paper trail anybody can follow. Government money, weird ghosts, baby ghosts, sweet baby, turning funds into ideology. But the most ironic part, those people running this network were Gamergate veterans.
Remember 2014, when gamers accused the media of colluding to protect developers from criticism? When gaming journalists declared gamers are dead and the audience became the enemy? Those same journalists now run the funding network. Weird Ghosts, Baby Ghosts, Sweet Baby Inc.
So if you're still wondering why 500,000 gamers are tracking Sweet Baby, it's not because of one tweet or one character, it's because to them, Sweet Baby is the final evolution of a system that declared war on its own customers. But here's the plot twist. This empire is crumbling.
Square Enix watched their profits crater 70%. Their response? Fire the consultants. New mission statement. Unforgettable experiences and short fun and a promise to engage honestly with their players. In other words, less optics and more gameplay. Even BlackRock is backing out. Larry Fink admitted it cost his firm $4 billion. And he doesn't even use the term anymore. ESG has been weaponized by the far left and the far right, he said. I'm ashamed of being part of this conversation.
Of course, Larry's not giving up. He's just rebranding once again.
ESG investing seems to be getting a new look as the trend faced growing political criticism, but it seems there's still a lot of excitement focused on the E in ESG, just under a new name, transition investing.
Same religion, new branding. And that, not Sweet Baby. That's the real culprit in this Game of Thrones, branding. Because underneath every label is the same impossible promise, infinite growth in a finite world. But that's an impossibility. You cannot sell more copies than there are gamers, than there are hours in a day, than there is money in wallets. But every quarter, investors want more. So maybe the real transition we need isn't economic, it's philosophical. Because gaming wasn't supposed to need consultants and diversity scorecards, it was supposed to be simple and fun. An escape, with hot women, with mysterious lore, and games without pronouns, just bosses and blood.
And maybe, just maybe, that's where we're headed. Not because Sweet Baby failed, but because publishers remember one thing, that gamers aren't picky babies, they're customers. And the customer always wins.